Hey guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch, and I'm so excited because it's March 10th and today it's going to be 60 degrees. We've had, I think, the 7th coldest winter on record here in Colorado. I am beyond ready for spring. So we have some stuff here to plant. I'm going to take you on a tour of the greenhouse so that you can see what it looks like in peak production, and then we're going to plant a few things out. Let's go! In the spring is when I get sunburned, so I make sure to put on lots of sunscreen, and then I take care of the baby chicks that we're raising in our bathroom. We're taking care of 5 right now. We try to handle them every day so they get used to people. This one is my favorite. Her name is Fluffy. And then it's time to take care of the sheep. Today we had to clean out their barn a little bit and replace their straw, and then we gave them some food. Midnight loves food, it's just his favorite, and Roosevelt wanted some cheek scratches. Now, if you're seed starting with me, doing anything like lisianthus or any cool living flowers, then today is the day for you. We're going to be touring the greenhouse so you can see what is happening in here right now. Let's go. Here we are. I've mentioned before that we grow a lot in our little 6x10 greenhouse. I really maximize the space, mostly by using soil blocks. So right now we have about 7,000 seedlings going in here. Once we get this batch planted out, then we're gonna start our warm season plants. So I'm getting ready to start peppers, tomatoes. So we have a few things going in here that are gonna stay in here for another couple weeks. And we're gonna actually start hardening these off next. So these guys will be hardening off next. These are our lisianthus. So these ones are almost ready to plant out, some of these larger ones. I like to plant them here at about 3rd leaf stage. And this is also the time when I have to be careful that we are not letting them get too hot. And the lisianthus take a really long time. We started these December 7th. These will be going out in about 3 weeks. So we are going to give them another fertilize. We're going to keep these in the minis just because I don't have room to pot up 2,000 lisianthus. That's how many we're growing this year. It's just too many. So over on the top shelves, we've got those lisianthus. Things that are still germinating, we usually keep on the lower shelves because with the direct sunlight, they tend to dry out faster and sometimes they get too hot for germination. So we keep those on these kind of lower shelves down here. So that includes things like our snap peas. So we already have our sweet peas ready to grow out. Our sugar snap peas, I actually just start in the little soil blocks and I just barely germinate them. And once they've germinated, I go ahead and pop them out. So I really just grow them in the soil blocks for a couple of weeks and then plant them. These are gonna go in about 6 weeks before our last frost. Very frost tolerant, cold tolerant plants, the peas. I also have a tray here that I was experimenting with. This was using a new soil called Dirtcraft, straight out of the bag to make some soil blocks. You can see we've got lettuce, we have some chamomile straw flowers, some chives. So I just tried a whole bunch of different things to see how that would do, and that Dirtcraft soil performed really well. So if you're looking for a ready to go out of the bag soil blocking mix, it's this one, the Gravity Growers Mix by Dirtcraft. Peat-free, good stuff. Up here we have some of those penstemon growing. Penstemon, very tricky to start from seed, so we just usually start a lot. What we do is we actually sprinkle them into this little, like a little berry container or onto a paper towel, and then we just keep that moist, and as they germinate we prick them out and put them into the soil blocks. The onions up here are getting ready to go. Growing them from seed is actually much better. They'll be less likely to bolt. And the other benefit of growing them from seed is that you have a lot of options in terms of varieties. So when I'm growing the onions, what I do, because they tend to pop up and out of the soil blocks a little bit, so as they grow, I just sprinkle a little bit of soil on top, just the same seed starting soil I used, and then water it down, and then that way the roots don't get exposed and they grow healthier and nice and thick. And this is another little pre-sprouting area. So I have my heat mat here. There are a couple experiments we have going. This is actually milkweed seeds that we're experimenting with pre-sprouting in water. And then over here I have all the natives that we have cold stratified in our freezer. So we have Echinacea purpurea. I put the date that they went into the freezer, and then we take them out and we put them on a heat mat to germinate. So these ones all need light to germinate. And as they germinate is when I pop them into the soil blocks. So that helps me save a little bit of space because I'm not wasting space on seeds that aren't going to germinate. So here you can see none of these Echinacea have started, although maybe one here is starting to sprout. So I'll keep checking back in with these Echinacea until they've pre-sprouted, and then I'll put them into their trays. This is one of my favorite fillers. This is Orlia, And Orlia is a white lacy bloom, and this one can be planted super early too, 6 to 8 weeks before last frost. We've got Bells of Ireland, another cold tolerant one. This is going to be planted out 6 to 8 weeks before last frost. Foxglove, of course, also cold tolerant. These will go out 6 weeks before last frost. And these babies really need to go out. This is our stock. And stock is an early bloomer, so stock really prefers to be planted out and be blooming before the temperatures hit around 80 degrees. If they're not blooming by then they're usually not going to bloom at all. So we have a whole row of them here. These ones actually got potted up because they were getting quite big for their blocks. And then we also have a whole nother tray of the mini soil blocks that we'll be planting right from here. Just as a comparison, I'm going to show you, this is what the stock looks like in the larger soil blocks. So I know I've said this before, but if you can start things in these 1.5 inch soil blocks instead of the tiny ones, they really do better. I know people say, and I say this too, you can plant from the small ones, but they are going to do better if they're started in a bigger block. If you do have the space, you can do that. Another one that's really great and cold tolerant is our snapdragons. So snapdragons, we do grow them in the soil blocks as well, and we like to plant them out early. So there are a few different varieties. One is the cold loving varieties, Chantilly and Madame Butterfly. Those are kind of the colder loving ones. And then there's also Potomac and Rocket, which are more full season bloomers. So these cool loving ones like to be out early. Again, 6 weeks before last frost is great. We had them snowed on last year. We had a huge snowstorm and they did just fine. They really don't mind snow at all, especially if you've hardened them up properly. That's a whole nother video. Outside the greenhouse right now, I have some things on the ground hardening off. So I'm going through that process of exposing the plants to wind, to more sunlight, to the different temperature swings that happen outside. So usually I like to take at least a week and ideally 2 weeks to do the hardening off process. So a lot of these guys have been hardening off for 2 weeks now. Right now we have some things on the ground that are getting ready to go out. So some of the things we're going to be planting today include our violas. You can see these are beyond ready to go. They are actually blooming in their little tray. Oh, they smell so wonderful. Oh, I'm gonna have to make some syrup with those. So pretty. We're also gonna be planting out some of our ranunculus today. We're also gonna be planting out a lot of our stock today. So these have all been outside hardening off for about 2 weeks so that they're ready for the cold. And these guys really do like cold. Now stock are one that we do not pinch. Most plants, we'll give them a little pinch just right above the bottom 2 sets of leaves that will help them branch. That's not true of stock. Most stock varieties only have 1 single flower per plant, so we don't pinch them or else you won't get flowers. We are hardening off our sweet peas. If they grow too hot, then they start to get leggy. So you can see these ones are nice and bushy. You can see from the base how they're branching out, and I haven't had to pinch them. So they're branching on their own, and that's because they've been grown cold. So they get what's called a frost pinch. So normally with sweet peas, if they start getting long and leggy, you'll come along and you'll give them a little pinch where you nip off the top set of leaves and then it branches from the bottom. But if you grow them cold, they branch because the frost actually pinches them. So I'm sure if you pick this up, we'll see lots of roots here. And we're growing these sweet peas in trays, these deep-rooted trays, because you can see how deep the roots of the sweet peas do go. And they like to put down nice deep roots. But they're not quite ready to plant yet, and they did actually get frozen and pretty hard last week, which normally they're fine with, but these ones got a little bit of, you can see the freeze damage here. Usually my goal with planting sweet peas is right around St. Patrick's Day. I usually look at the 10-day forecast right around that time and see what the weather looks like. If we're gonna come into a big cold period, then I hold off on planting them, but they're outside hardening off. So right now we're about 8 to 9 weeks before last frost. That's when I'm planting my violas, my stock, and my ranunculus. I do have them going into a tunnel. If you wanna build a tunnel, we have a how-to on our channel. It's very quick and easy to do. That way they have a little extra protection in case we get snow or very cold temperatures. All right, so first we have to open up the tunnel. All right, the soil in here is pretty dry because it's been covered, and we've had a dry stretch here, so I'm gonna go ahead and water, because if we try to water after we plant, it just doesn't work that well. I like to water before. And this is actually a row that was dahlias last year, so there was no cover crop on it because the dahlia rows were not able to cover crop because we wait so long to take them out of the soil. So we don't have time to establish a cover crop in those rows. So this row did not have a cover crop. Now, if you had some soil that was a little bit nitrogen deficient, you could use our alfalfa pallet recipe. But at this stage of the regenerative practices that we follow, doing rotational plantings, cover cropping, I don't usually add much in terms of fertilizer or nitrogen. I just find it's not necessary. The whole theory with our regenerative practices is if the soil biology is there to mineralize the nutrients that are existing in the soil, then we don't have to add it. Okay, so we are starting out here, and as you can see, the soil blocks are really easy to plant. So basically what I do is I just grab a whole bunch and I just pull them apart just like this, so you don't have to worry about popping anything out of a tray, which I love. Now the stalk I am spacing quite tightly just because it only grows a single stalk, like we mentioned, a single stem, one flower. And because it only grows one flower and it's a short-lived annual, so it really only blooms and then we'll pull it out and flip this bed, that means that it doesn't need much space. So we plant them fairly tightly. This is probably about 4 inches, usually from my knuckle to the tip of my finger is 4 inches. So that's about what we're doing here. And I do have my irrigation lines in place. I like to have those in because that way I know exactly where to plant. If you try to put in the irrigation lines after you've already planted, sometimes you end up squishing some seedlings. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that first. I also like to make sure that the blocks are really nice and watered before I start because that lets them pull apart easily. And it also helps keep them hydrated. So obviously there's just a little bit of soil here for the root. So we wanna make sure that they have a good watered start to life. We have really heavy clay soil. You can see it here on my fingers. Clay soil gets a bad rap, but actually clay has great nutrient holding capacity. So this year's been a little scary, I think, for me, just because I've decided to not buy in any plugs. So normally flower farmers buy in things that are either difficult to grow or very slow to grow, like the lisianthus, and they buy them from plug sellers who just send you the plants when it's time to plant them, which is really nice and convenient, as you could guess. But this year I decided to make the commitment to not buy any plugs because last year I started doing some digging into how those plugs were grown, and we found out that a lot of plugs are treated with pesticides, and some of those are systemic, and they're things that I would not use in my field, and fungicides that I just really strongly feel we should not be using in growing. And it's not necessary, really. I mean, when you're growing, these big growers, plug sellers they grow millions of plants, in one greenhouse. And so their disease risk, their pest risk is much higher. If you can grow in your own small space, you have a lot more control over the growing conditions, what kind of pesticides are treated with. I just said I'm not doing it anymore. I want to make sure that what I'm putting into my soil is clean, and what I'm growing is clean, and what I'm feeding my family is clean. And so we're growing everything from seed this year, which has been scary because the nice thing about plugs is they're coming. With very few exceptions, okay, on April 13th, I'm going to get 3,000 lisianthus plugs. That's not the case when you're growing from seed. It's like you forget to water and you lose a whole tray or 3 trays or a greenhouse full, and there's no backup plan. So it's been scary, but it's also, I think, been really good for me to learn how to put my faith in myself and believe that I can do it and challenge myself to do it. And so far, I'm really happy. Last year I ordered a bunch of stuff in and I was not even happy with the quality of it at the end of the day. So everything was root bound, and then they ship everything in like so much packaging and so much, there's a lot of boxes, there's styrofoam everywhere. And so I'm really happy with the decision. I think the seedlings look really happy and healthy. I'll definitely do it again next year. I think I just wanted to test myself and find out if I could do it. If I could grow all 15,000 of my plants myself without needing to rely on plugs. And so if you don't know if you can do it, you can. You can grow for your family, you can grow for your own space without having to buy in plants that you don't know how they were grown. Line these up so that I stay close, at least, to my spacing. All right, so the next thing I'm planting in are the ranunculus. If you look at a ranunculus wrong, it rots, I swear, every time. So I'm doing these every 6 inches. So for me, that's usually like a full hand. That's how I measure that. As I mentioned, I just pre-sprout these in trays. So when you're planting, it's quite easy. You just grab the whole thing and you can see the nice healthy roots on these. Usually I actually overwinter these, which means I overwinter them. Over the winter, they just kind of slowly grow, and then in the spring they bloom. But last year we had such a failure on our ranunculus, and I think, you know, it's human to talk about failures, and I have them just like anyone has them, and they were a fail. And I also just worked so hard trying to keep them alive all winter. It was a really hard winter, and I just didn't want to do that this year. So this year I'm planting in the spring, and you know, I might get less robust flowers, but I didn't get barely any flowers last year. I think I got like maybe 2 bunches of ranunculus. It was ridiculous. And when I'm planting these ranunculus, I'm not planting them very deeply. So I'm really planting them because, again, I mentioned if you look at them wrong, they will rot. The corm, which you can see here, this is the corm, so that just sits right at soil level. I don't want them to be too deep because, like I mentioned, if they rot, they're goners. I'm here in the tunnel. I am, you can see that I've actually partitioned off part of this tunnel because it's 32 feet long. I don't need all of it. And if I partition it off, I can actually put some heat in here if I have to, if it gets really cold. So because it's still only March 10th, we're definitely gonna still get freezes. So in fact, I think we have snow coming up this week, and it's supposed to be around 20 degrees. So it's going to be cold. But today I'm gonna plant some of these little lettuces in here so that we can have some fresh lettuce earlier. This will have us harvesting lettuce much earlier than we could if we planted it outside. So just with a little bit of protection. These are just wire hoops that I use to elevate the frost fabric up off the plant. So because it's still early in the season, we will be getting frost still. So we use these within this tunnel structure to help keep the frost fabric up off the plants themselves. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today coming along with me in a busy day in spring on the farm. I need to go take a shower. See you later.